Europe is running out of resources. One of the most active donor countries, the Netherlands, states that it has exhausted its capabilities, having already spent 9 billion euros on weapons for Ukraine. Is Europe really running out of resources for Ukraine? Is the old aid scheme, where weapons were simply taken from warehouses and sent to the front, being exhausted? We will break this down in this video. Many people will say Europe is tired. The logic is clear, but the Netherlands' statement concerns not willingness, but physical stockpiles. The country says it can no longer transfer weapons from its reserves without risking its own defense capability. This is felt especially acutely with scarce items like Patriot missiles. At the same time, the Netherlands has already announced a new package worth 500 million euros, half for domestically produced drones, and the other half through the Pearl program for American weapons. In other words, the country is not leaving the game, but is changing the format of its participation. In total, the EU and its member states have mobilized 77 billion euros in military support, while the overall assistance to Ukraine, including finances, humanitarian programs, funds from frozen Russian assets, and support for refugees, is estimated at 215.2 billion euros. In 2026, the EU also approved a loan of 90 billion euros for Ukraine's budgetary and defense needs for 2026 to 2027. Of this amount, about 60 billion will go toward the development of the defense industry, and 3.9 billion has already been allocated for the purchase of drones. Separately, there is the SAFE program, which provides up to 150 billion euros in loans for joint defense procurements by EU countries, in which Ukraine participates on equal terms and Ukrainian companies can receive contracts. Of the 19 national SAFE plans submitted in 2025, 15 provide for cooperation with Ukraine. So the assistance is not disappearing, it is changing form. This refers to the Pearl program, through which NATO coordinates the procurement of critical equipment from the United States for Ukraine. The Supreme Allied Commander Europe determines what Ukraine needs and what the United States can supply faster than the Europeans. The Allies fund these packages. NATO organizes the delivery. As of June 2026, the Allies have already allocated over $6 billion for American equipment through this mechanism. Simply put, Europe lacks air defense stocks, missiles, and ammunition here and now, so it pays for American supplies while ramping up its own production. Plus, Ukraine receives critically important systems. The downside is that it still means dependence on the United States. The Netherlands is acting according to the same logic. They are allocating 1 billion euros to Pearl for Ukraine to receive air defense systems, missiles, and ammunition for the F-16. In 2025, the European Commission presented the White Paper for European Defence and a plan according to which documents will address closing critical gaps and preparing Europe for the worst-case scenarios by 2030. Priorities: air defence, artillery, missiles, drones, cyber defence, artificial intelligence, and electronic warfare. The European defence industry has already increased ammunition production by 40%. However, while these capacities are ramping up, enemy missiles continue to fly. Growth figures do not shoot down targets in the sky right now. Here, Ukraine is not only a recipient of aid, but also a source of innovation, especially in the fields of drones and AI. The European Commission is openly talking about deepening cooperation. There are initiatives such as BraveTech and the EU Defence Innovation Office in Kyiv. European funding for drones has also increased sharply. In the first 4 months of 2026, donors allocated about 1.6 billion euros, compared to just 400 million in 2022. At the NATO summit in Ankara, Hungarian Prime Minister Péter Magyar called Ukraine a victim and Russia an aggressor, but immediately stated that Hungary would continue to provide only humanitarian aid without weapons or troops. A moral stance in words and caution in practice can exist simultaneously. NATO has set a goal. By 2035, allies must spend 3.5% of GDP on core defense, plus 1.5% on related areas. But in 2026, only 5 NATO countries will reach the 3.5% mark: Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Poland, and Greece. The average figure among European members of the alliance and Canada is 2.5% of GDP. That is, the target is declared for 2035, but most countries are still far from it. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte emphasizes that support for Ukraine must continue and that every ally should do their part. And now, the main risk for Ukraine is not the availability of weapons, but the speed. Will Europe manage to turn money and strategies into real systems faster than Russia increases its pressure? Subscribe to Focus, like this video, and turn on notifications to stay up to date with the latest events.